In this video, I talk about everything that you need to know about oil painting brushes. This is meant to be more of a comprehensive primer for the beginner, but intermediate painters will also get loads of information out of this video too. Welcome or welcome back. I'm Kelsey, and on this channel I talk about everything art and oil painting related, and I also chronicle my journey to become a full-time artist. If that sounds like your jam, consider hitting that subscribe button down below, but let's jump into the content. So first, we'll talk about basic brush terminology. I'll be explaining things like bright, filbert, round, chisel, and rigger, and also what those types of words and brushes are used for. I'll also be explaining paintbrush anatomy and the difference between synthetic and natural hairs. If you already know this stuff, feel free to skip ahead from these sections. I have timestamps in the description for you. Next, I'll talk about where to buy oil painting brushes. I have 3 main options that I'm going to be recommending today, and those options should cover just about everyone in terms of price point. In this section, I'll also be recommending a basic set of brushes if you're just starting out. And finally, how to take care of them. In the last section of this video, I'll walk you through how I clean my oil painting brushes, and as well as some tips for long-term care. I don't use any toxic solvents in my painting process, so that makes cleanup way easier, and I actually have an entire video about non-toxic oil painting that I'll link above if you're interested in learning more about that. So without further ado, let's get started. So there are 3 main types of paintbrush. You have your flat. This is basically just a rectangular brush. All of the brushes are straight. They're all in a rectangular orientation. There's a flat top here, and yeah. Next, we have a filbert. This is pretty much just like the flat, only you have a rounded sort of domed top here. This is really useful for painting flower petals and things like that, while the flat is great for a more angular look and also scrubbing in paint and just laying out a lot of color at once. Finally, you have your round. This is just a brush with a really rounded tip. It's got sort of a nice tapered oval kind of shape, and you can get these in a bunch of different sizes. While these are the main 3 types of paintbrush, there are also loads of funkier ones out there. You've got brights, which are just like flats but have a more sort of shorter, square kind of bristle and shape. And you've also got fans. This is a fan. Fan brushes are good for blending colors and also to paint things like hair and grasses where you sort of want that, that orientation. You've also got something like a rigger. Riggers are really, really long, thin, round brushes, essentially. They're really good for painting straight lines, but also to sign your name at the end of the painting. Now I want to cover the anatomy of a paintbrush. So a paintbrush has 3 main parts. So you've got the brush itself, and then you've got, this is called the ferrule. So the brush, all the bristles are held inside this little metal bit, and then the metal bit here is crimped at this sort of middle part, and you can see that, there you go. You can see that right here, and you've got it crimped right here, and this leads into the handle. So you have 2 different types of handle. There's a long handle and a short handle. I prefer short handles for my really small detail-oriented brushes. So this is a pointed round. You can see how small those bristles are. And I like a short handle for these small brushes because I don't want it poking me in the eye when I'm really close to the painting. So in terms of paintbrush size, there is really sort of no standardized scale. That's why it's really important to look at the measurements that the manufacturer or the seller has for the paintbrush and compare it against what you already have. Here's a good example. These are both size 4 rounds. Look at how different they are. Like, you cannot really compare these. They are not super comparable. You see how much bigger this one is? This is from Princeton, this one right here. It is a Princeton Dakota 6300. I got it from Dick Blick. And this is a Rosemary & Co. It's also a size 4. And they are just completely different in terms of size. That's why it's really important to look at the measurements. And you'll often see terms like extra long flat. That essentially just means that the rectangle of the brush is just going to be longer. So you're going to have more room between the tip of the brush. Some people, I guess the proper term is to call this the toe and then the belly and then the heel of the brush. I think that sounds weird, so I just call it the tip, middle, and the end. But essentially, if you have a word like an extra long flat on a brush listing online, that essentially just means that there is more room between the tip and the ferrule of the brush. So the overall brush is just longer. Same with this filbert. If I was talking about an extra long filbert or an extra long round, there would just be more bristle to hold paint. And speaking of your bristle hairs individually, there's quite a bit of a controversy over whether synthetic or natural hair is the best for your bristles and your paintbrushes. I'm not really going to touch on that too much in this video. I'm going to save that for another time. If you're interested in learning more about that, make sure to subscribe so you can know when that video airs. But essentially, what's important for your bristles is a few things. You have snap and stiffness to talk about. So these are the brushes that I was talking about a little bit earlier. This is a size 6 round from Rosemary & Co. and this is a size 4 from Princeton. And even still, they're not really comparable in terms of size. But notice how this brush right here is, I'm able to bend it much more. Here, let me do this. I'm able to bend this brush way more and it snaps back really well. But in terms of this brush, this is a synthetic. The other one was a natural bristle. This one, it's a little bit snappier. It's a little bit stiffer. It's gonna hold its shape much better over time. But if you wanted something softer with not as much of a chiseled sort of tip, then you'd probably want to go for something that was a little bit softer in terms of bristle and had a little bit more snap to it and felt a little bit more delicate in your hands. So if you watched this far and you find this video useful, consider hitting that like button. It really helps you find this channel and this video. The difference and the preference between natural and synthetic varies a lot. It really depends on what you're going for, what you need in a paintbrush. It's also really subjective. So there isn't really a right and wrong answer here. There's a lot of different kinds of natural bristles. You have hog bristles, which, let me find one. This is a hog bristle. It's pretty rough on the hands. It feels like animal hair. And it's gonna give you a much more sort of chiseled tip. This natural brush is way softer. It feels way more delicate in my hands. And those are two different natural brushes that have an entirely different look and feel. Similarly with synthetics, you have synthetics that try to mimic the effect of a hog bristle brush and synthetics that try to mimic something like this. So all in all, it really depends. If you're buying brushes for the very first time or trying out a new brand, I'd really recommend that you go to the store physically if possible, and if it's safe to do in your area, just so you can have the brush in your hands and feel it and figure out if it is what you want. Next, let's talk about where to buy oil painting brushes. Oil painting and all of its associated mediums and solvents can be really hard on your brushes, so it's important, at least to me, to invest in something that is going to last. That being said though, high quality doesn't necessarily correlate with a really high price. It's totally possible to spend a really affordable amount of money, like 50 bucks for example, or 35 if you wanted to go a little bit cheaper, and buy a set of really nice brushes that are going to last you forever if you take care of them appropriately. The absolute last thing that I want you to take away from this video is that you need to spend $200 to get started with oil painting just on your brushes. You do not, and you should not, spend $200 on oil painting brushes if you are just getting started. That is a bad idea. So if you are a complete beginner when it comes to oil painting, I'd really recommend that you go to an actual store to buy your first brushes for the very first time. Buying brushes is a really subjective thing, and you're going to quickly discover that there are some brushes that you sort of are naturally drawn to and some that you aren't. When you get to the store, I'd recommend that you buy 6 brushes, 2 of the 3 main types we discussed earlier. So I want you to get 2 flats, 2 filberts, and 2 rounds. And pick something in different sizes. So for the first filbert, pick a 2, and for the next filbert, pick a 4, for example. And if you're especially a near in person, you'll be able to see the difference. So you won't have the problem that I did of getting these 2 brushes that are supposedly supposed to be the same size and are just like completely not the same size at all. Artist Marco Bucci has this really good piece of advice where he advises artists to paint with a slightly larger brush than they think is appropriate. This helps beginners for a lot of different reasons, mostly because when you're a beginner, it's really easy to focus on the little details of everything. But if you use a slightly larger brush, that's going to force you to condense the information down to what you think is just the simplest possible thing. And this helps you practice focusing on the big picture rather than the small details. Once you've purchased your very first brushes, you're going to find that you're missing something, that there's just something in that set that you just need. Maybe you need a larger flat, or a rigger, or a chisel, or a fan brush. And now you know that information that you probably didn't know before. And this is the point where you can accurately and successfully, without wasting a bunch of money, buy oil painting brushes online. So that being said, there are 3 places that I recommend that you buy your oil painting brushes online. So the first option that I'm going to recommend is the quintessential online art store, Dick Blake Art Materials. They've lately just been like putting Blick art materials in their packaging, and I really don't know why. Like, why wouldn't you want the word dig on your packaging? I don't know. I guess some mysteries just weren't for mankind to know. The brushes that I've mainly tried from Blick is their Princeton Dakota 6300 line. This is a synthetic brush, I believe. It's stiffer, like I was talking about before, and their sizes are pretty inaccurate. They go on the larger side of brushes. The advantage of Blick is that they have a bunch of different brushes at a bunch of different price points. So you can browse their online selection, and they also have brick and mortar stores, which is great all across the US as well. And Treckle is another great online art supply store as well. They're much smaller and generally have a much smaller selection than Blick does, at a larger price point as well, so they're more expensive. But their brushes, their in-house brush brand, and their panels that they make in-house, those are handmade and those are great, absolutely amazing quality. And they have the rewards program that Blick doesn't, so you can actually save money by buying from them long term. And those two things, the quality of their brushes and their panels, the fact that they're handmade, that they do everything in-house, and that they have a rewards program, has basically made me a lifelong customer of them. I use their panels exclusively in my artwork. I never stray, I never go anywhere else if I'm painting on a panel, and their brushes are really great. They have a synthetic hog bristle brush that is excellent. I use it to scrub my underpaintings, and I find that it works really well. They also have really great stuff to care for your brushes. I use their linseed oil painting soap, and we'll talk about that later in this video when we talk about how to care for your brushes, but essentially it is just a breeze to use. And finally, Rosemary & Co. is generally considered to have the world's best oil painting brushes. This sounds a little crazy. Like, Kelsey, why are you suggesting the world's best oil painting brushes? I thought this was going to be an affordable selection of places to buy your brushes, but Rosemary & Co. is affordable. That's a really great part of that company. Rosemary & Co. is a handmade, family-run, UK-owned business, and all of the brushes are made by hand. It's just this one family doing stuff, and they're really great quality. They have an absolutely enormous selection of brushes that are just top-notch in terms of quality, and if you've been looking for like some crazy specialty brush, they have that. And they've also been known to work with artists individually to create a brush that they don't offer, but like, chances are they already have the brush that you want. And their prices are pretty similar to Treckle, so you can just kind of go crazy. And if you're committed to not using natural hair brushes, if you're a vegan, for example, they have a lot of different types of synthetic brush. They have a synthetic hog bristle. They have just a lot of different excellent synthetic brushes that I use personally in my own work all the time. Their Evergreen line is a synthetic brush that is just my all-time favorite brush ever, and they're just excellent quality. The one disadvantage though is that if you're in the US, shipping from their UK workshop can take 3 to 4 weeks and a little over a month if it has to go through customs for a long time. So that is a disadvantage, but like I said, they can't be beat. They're just the best brushes available. Now let's talk about how to care for your brushes. If you've just spent your hard-earned cash on your paintbrushes, you want them to last. Brushes are like a really great investment. They're a thing that you want to take care of. So I personally don't use any toxic solvents in my oil painting process. That includes turpentine or like any types of paint thinner. And if you're interested in more about that, I have an entire video on it that I'll link above, like I talked about earlier. And this makes cleaning up a breeze. I don't have to worry about putting all of my like brush cleaning thing in a jar and then collecting all of these jars and then eventually taking all the jars to like my toxic waste disposal area, because that's a mess. We don't want to deal with that, okay? We don't want to deal with that. So I clean my brushes with 3 things. 1, water, 2, my hands, and 3, the Treckle linseed oil painting soap that I mentioned earlier. This stuff is great because you don't have to worry about washing down the sink. There are no harmful chemicals. You're just good to go. You can just do it in your kitchen sink. You probably shouldn't, but you could. And my process here that you're seeing right now is to just wet the soap, and then I work the soap into the bristles, and I repeat the process, washing it out with water until the water runs clear and the bristles look clean. And to make sure that my brushes last me for years to come, I also use their brush restorer. Their brush restorer looks like this. It's just a little jar. And it's essentially like a conditioner for your brushes, so you dip them in, work them into the bristles, and then let it dry and wash out. The one thing here is that I've noticed that it's not great at like finagling those like little tiny bristles that splay out of the brush. Let me show you an example. Like this brush, for example, I don't know if you can see that, but there's like a few hairs that are just sticking out that are really annoying. So the brush restorer isn't great at finagling those. It does do a little bit of a good job, but I am on the hunt for something a little bit better, and I will comment on this video if I ever find it. Some last tips before I let you guys go today are to never let the paint get into the ferrule of the brush. So this is the ferrule, like I talked about earlier, the metal bit, and you never want your paint to get really down to like the bottom of the brush, okay? That's bad. Why is that bad? Because the paint is gonna dry in there, okay? It's gonna dry in there, and then your brush is gonna lose its shape. It's gonna get all stiff down here, it's not gonna wanna bend as nicely, and you're gonna be sad, okay? Just trust me on this, you're gonna be sad. And my next tip is to never wait more than 24 hours before cleaning your brushes, especially if you're using a medium that makes the oil paint dry faster. This is just going to increase the longevity of your brushes. Dried oil paint in brushes just never really works well, but if this does happen to you and you're using that trickle oil painting soap that like I recommended, I'd recommend that you like shave a little bit off and like get it in some hot water and then let your brushes rest in the hot water for a little while. Not forever, okay? Don't do this for hours at a time. Just enough for the oil paint to like sort of get a little bit softened, and then you can scrub it off better. All right, so that is the end for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like down below and hit that subscribe button and comment to let me know if you guys have any more questions. And I will link some of the products that I mentioned today in the description below. Those are going to be affiliate links. So before I can get monetized, I really recommend that you guys purchase affiliate links from me in the description. Like I said, because those purchases really do help. I get a fraction of the cost at no extra cost to you. And they're just, it's nice. It's a nice thing. It's like a little thank you. Bye guys.